Thank you for watching Amir 5858. I am Amir. I am thankful to all news resources and my team for their cooperation. Following are the news which have been reported by American, European, Canadian, African, Asian channels and also the news agencies, Reuters, AFP, AP. Now the news in detail. Rather, news headlines. Mr. Trump, January 6 Capitol riots and Supreme Court. Russia is targeting Ukraine's energy systems continuously. Their effects on the Ukrainian society and the people. Mike Johnson, Speaker of U.S. Congress, again in trouble. Jury selection for Donald Trump Hutch case in New York. Israel cabinet postponed to make decision regarding Iran attack. Congress panel criticized China for helping production increase in fentanyl. Fentanyl caused 200 people death every day in America. New protection rules for coal miners. In Olympia, Greece, Olympic torch lit. New edition for Library of Congress. On Wall Street, Dow Jones went up, Nasdaq and S&P 500 went down. Now the news in detail.
In Kyiv, Ukraine.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. On the NewsHour tonight, the U.S. Supreme Court considers whether a charge of obstructing an official proceeding can be used to prosecute Capitol rioters and former President Donald Trump.
Tonight from Ukraine, we look at Russia's intensifying attacks on Ukraine's energy system, the impact on its people, and the war.
What's going to happen in the city? Will the rockets come into the city? Will they hit houses? What will happen the next day with heat, with water?
And House Speaker Mike Johnson's job is in peril again after a second House Republican pushes to oust him over plans to send aid to Ukraine and Israel.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by...
These are people who are trying to change the world. Startups have this energy that energizes me. I'm thriving by helping others every day. People who know BDO.
The ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Kathy and Paul Anderson, and Camilla and George Smith.
Certified Financial Planner professionals are proud to support PBS NewsHour. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
The John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, fostering informed and engaged communities. More at kf.org.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. Here in Ukraine, as leaders await news of additional U.S. aid, Russia's war here has entered a new phase, now attacking Ukraine's energy infrastructure with devastating precision. But first, we begin at home, where the U.S. Supreme Court heard oral arguments today in a case about January 6th.
And those arguments focused on whether part of a federal obstruction law can be used to prosecute some of the rioters involved in the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. The court's ruling could impact hundreds of criminal cases, even the pending case against former President Donald Trump. Kyle Cheney, Politico's senior legal affairs reporter, has been following the January 6th legal fallout, and he joins us now. Kyle, thanks so much for being with us. We should say this case was brought by a former Pennsylvania police officer, Joseph Fisher, who was charged with multiple crimes for pushing his way into the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, 2021. Walk us through the arguments the justices heard today.
So Fisher's challenge this obstruction law it's a complicated law, but his argument is simple. This law was passed after the Enron scandal in 2000. It was meant to stop people from tampering with evidence in a court-like proceeding or a congressional proceeding, not envisioned to cover the sort of riotous conduct that we saw on January 6th. So he may be culpable for a lot of stuff on January 6th, but this obstruction charge, which by the way has a 20-year maximum sentence, he says that should not apply to him or his fellow rioters.
And the Supreme Court's conservative majority seemed skeptical of the Justice Department's position. Help us understand why they seemed dubious of the DOJ's broad reading of this obstruction law.
So what DOJ essentially has said is actually no, that Fisher's wrong. This law was passed by Congress as a catch-all. It should apply to all kinds of obstructive conduct. They missed some stuff that Enron was doing. They wanted to make sure they didn't miss anything again, so we can sweep in all of this stuff that happened after January 6th as part of that broad umbrella. And the justices, the conservative justices in particular, were very skeptical about how broadly DOJ viewed it. Could it sweep in all kinds? Someone who stands up and interrupts the Supreme Court, could that person be charged with a 20-year felony? And DOJ said no, it's much tougher than that. You have to prove someone had corrupt intent, which is a very difficult thing to prove. That they knew what they were disrupting and did it on purpose. But the justices seemed to worry about how it could be applied and how widely it could be applied.
Meantime, some 350 people have been charged with obstructing an official proceeding for their part in the Capitol attack. More than 100 people have already been convicted and are serving prison sentences. What might the outcome of the Supreme Court's ruling mean for those cases, and what might it mean for Donald Trump, who is also charged with the obstruction crime?
If the Supreme Court rules as narrowly as it might, it could upend all of those cases that we described, those 350 cases. You've already served your sentence, you're kind of out of luck. But if you're serving or about to serve a sentence, it could totally change the game for you, and you could be on the hook for misdemeanors instead of a felony. As for Donald Trump, the question is, did his actions to send fake electors to Congress count as the same type of obstruction that this law was was meant to cover. So again, how the justices read that could read the charges against Donald Trump right out of Special Counsel Jack Smith's case, or could preserve it depending on how narrowly they construe it.
So the special counsel, is he planning potentially for an outcome that could upend his federal election subversion case?
He is, and he actually previewed his thinking on this in a recent Supreme Court filing in the presidential immunity case that's coming up with the justices next week. But his argument essentially is that even under the narrowest interpretation that the Supreme Court might take of the obstruction law, Donald Trump's conduct still fits squarely within it, because by sending fake elector certificates to Congress, that's exactly the type of evidence tampering that Congress was worried about when they passed this law in the aftermath of the Enron scandal.
Kyle Cheney with Politico, thanks so much for sharing your reporting and your insights with us. We appreciate it.
Good to be with you, Jeff.
I'm Stephanie Tsai with NewsHour West. Here are the latest headlines. On day 2 of former President Trump's criminal trial in New York, 7 jurors were selected. 5 more jurors, plus alternates, have to be sworn in before opening statements begin as early as next week in the hush money case. At one point today, Judge Juan Merchan reprimanded the former president after he could be heard commenting about a juror and gesturing towards her. As worry grows about an expanded war in the Middle East, the United States announced this evening it will impose new sanctions on Iran after its attacks on Israel over the weekend. The European Union announced similar plans as part of an American-led effort to find a diplomatic solution. The U.S. sanctions will target Tehran's drone and missile programs and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Today, the Pentagon reaffirmed its support for Israel.
We do not seek escalation in the region, but we will not hesitate to defend Israel and protect our personnel. Again, we do not want to see a wider regional war. We don't see conflict with Iran, but we won't hesitate to take necessary actions to protect our forces.
U.S. Air Force jets and Navy destroyers supported Israel during the Iranian attack on Saturday. A U.S. congressional panel is accusing China of directly subsidizing production of chemicals used in synthetic fentanyl. Investigators said the government offers tax incentives when these chemicals are produced for export. At a hearing on Capitol Hill today featuring former Attorney General William Barr, among others, committee members lashed out at Beijing.
Through its actions, as our report has revealed, the Chinese Communist Party is telling us that it wants more fentanyl entering our country. It wants the chaos and devastation that has resulted from this epidemic. And yes, that means more dead Americans.
Fentanyl is a leading cause of drug overdoses in the U.S., killing an average of 200 Americans each day. The Biden administration issued new protections today for coal miners against so-called black lung disease. The rule requires mining companies to cut workers' exposure to silica dust in half. In central Appalachia, 1 in 5 miners has the respiratory disease. Acting Labor Secretary Julie Su said, quote, "We're making it clear that no job should be a death sentence." A federal appeals court has overturned a West Virginia law banning transgender girls from playing on girls' sports teams. The court found that the law violates Title IX, which prohibits sex-based discrimination in schools. The case was brought on behalf of a 13-year-old transgender girl who said the law had blocked her from running on her middle school track team. A Renaissance-era landmark in Denmark's capital went up in flames today. The blaze broke out at Copenhagen's Old Stock Exchange as it was undergoing renovations ahead of its 400th anniversary. The spire of the structure, a twisted spear of 4 dragons' tails, collapsed in the fire. The city's mayor called the building an iconic piece of Danish heritage.
I can't put into words what the stock exchange means for us as a building and a symbol for Copenhagen. The 4 dragons are a part of our skyline, and a lot of people from Copenhagen cycle past it or walk past it every day. It's a 400-year-old cultural history that has been lost not only in Copenhagen, but also in Denmark.
Passers-by helped emergency crews save paintings and other artifacts from inside the famous building. There were no reported casualties and no word on what caused the fire. The torch for this summer's Paris Olympics was lit at a ceremony in Greece today. In ancient Olympia, where the games originated, an actress playing the role of high priestess ignited the flame. The torch relay will head to Athens and then onwards to France. The journey will end with the lighting of the Olympic flame at the opening ceremony in Paris on July 26th. And the Library of Congress has added 25 new audio selections to the National Recording Registry. That means they've been deemed worthy of preservation for all time based on their cultural, historical, or aesthetic importance. They include the Notorious B.I.G.'s 1994 album Ready to Die, Blondie's Parallel Lines from 1978, and Gene Autry's Christmas classic Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Also among the entries was ABBA's 1976 classic Arrival and their hit Dancing Queen. Still to come on the NewsHour, a look at the worsening humanitarian crisis in Sudan 1 year after the start of its brutal civil war. The health risks from nearby petrochemical plants for those living and born in Louisiana. And the new film Civil War explores what could happen if a divided America goes to war with itself.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
This year, Russia has launched a series of deliberate and devastating attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Taking advantage of gaps and shortages in Ukraine's air defenses, Russia has systematically targeted nearly every single power plant in this country. Officials here tell us the last few weeks have been unlike any they've seen before in this war.
An idyllic scene in the city of Ukrainka, just outside of Kyiv. But the Russian attack here, just 3 days earlier, is fresh in Gennadi's mind.
We're going to watch how the process unfolds. Jeff?
I'm Navaz in Kyiv tonight. It's great to see you. Our thanks to you and the team there.
Thanks, Jeff.
On Capitol Hill, House Speaker Mike Johnson spent the day juggling his foreign aid priorities for Ukraine and Israel with potential threats to his job from members of his own party. Lisa Desjardins is here to explain. So, Lisa, lots of consequential topics all being debated at once today.
That's right. In the past day, some very significant breaking news, especially out of the House of Representatives, and even by the standards of this Congress. The drama and the stakes for this week are perilously high.
Thank you, Mr. Leader.
After 6 cautious months,
It's a big day on Capitol Hill. And
Mike Johnson is now defining and risking his speakership with a high-stakes push to aid Ukraine and Israel.
I put out a preliminary plan, as you all know, on these measures to handle these matters from Israel to Ukraine to the Indo-Pacific region.
It's a big move, with reporters waiting for details, closely watching Johnson's fellow Republicans. After Thomas Massie of Kentucky called for Johnson to resign and said he supports a motion to vacate or oust Johnson, introduced by fellow Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene.
I'm not going to call the motion to vacate, but I will tell you that if it is called, there will be a lot of people who vote for it.
Massey says Johnson is helping Democrats, but today, most House Republicans, even rebellious types, backed Johnson as Speaker.
I respect Thomas, but I disagree with that. The last thing this country needs.
We'll watch it closely.
Lisa Desjardins, thanks to you as always.
Welcome.
This week is the one-year anniversary of the war in Sudan. What started as an internal power struggle has now forced more than 8 million people to flee their homes. 16 million are facing hunger and even famine, and tens of thousands have been killed. Sudan shares borders with 7 countries and the Red Sea, and the U.S. warns the conflict could destabilize the entire region. Nick Schifrin, in collaboration with the North African media company Ain, starts our coverage as seen from a refugee camp in Chad.
In the wind-blown Sahara Desert, children... Outcome. Tom Perriello, Special Envoy for Sudan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
About a fifth of America's total petrochemical production is concentrated on a stretch of land along the Mississippi River in southeastern Louisiana. Those facilities provide many of the essentials of modern life: plastics, fertilizer, and even medical equipment. But that production also comes with serious risks. The area has also long been known as Cancer Alley because of the high rates of cancer among people who live near those plants. As William Brangham reports, a new study now documents how those risks may fall on the next generation as well.
All right.
Not long ago, Tisha couldn't imagine making memories like this with her son Cairo.
You sharing with mommy?
He was born prematurely, almost 2 months early, weighing just 4 pounds. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm William Brangham in southeastern Louisiana.
The new film Civil War is stirring debate and provoking conversation about where a divided nation could lead. It topped the domestic box office this weekend with a nearly $26 million opening, the biggest ever for its independent production company, A24 Studios. Jeffrey Brown talks to the film's director as part of our Arts and Culture series, Canvas.
The time, the near future. The place, the eastern part of the United States. Now a battle zone of armies, militias.
And that's the News Hour for tonight. I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Navaz. We'll be back here tomorrow night with a report from the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv, which has been under relentless Russian assault and is now bracing for more in this 3rd year of war. For now, on behalf of the entire NewsHour team, thank you for joining us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has...
On this Tuesday night, the federal budget unveiled. A promise to focus on younger Canadians and tax the wealthiest. The priorities of the new fiscal plan and the billions more in spending.
Every generation of Canadians can reach their full potential.
We speak with Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland. The suffering in Gaza and the hostilities between Israel and Iran. The continued calls for de-escalation as key players resort to more conflict. And keeping up with Caitlin Clark, the brightest star of college women's basketball, heads to the big leagues.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The federal government has released its 2024 budget. There are no new taxes for working and middle-class Canadians. There's no windfall tax on excess profits of grocery retailers. There are some initiatives to try to help with affordability, some of which were announced before this budget. Plans to build nearly 4 million homes by 2031 at a cost of more than $8 billion. $1.5 billion for the National Pharmacare Plan to cover the cost of contraception. The government plans to raise more than $18 billion by increasing the taxable portion of capital gains, which it says will affect 0.1% of Canadians. The Liberals are facing a slowing economy and have an uphill road in the polls right now. There are politics at play here. This budget includes about $57 billion in new spending over 5 years. And Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland says the deficit is forecast to be $39.8 billion. I will speak with her in just a moment, but first our chief political correspondent, David Aiken, is here to take us through the biggest points. David.
Well, Donna, this is a bit of a scattershot budget to a degree. It's sort of indicative of a government that's a bit behind in the polls, wants to have something for everyone. If we are looking for a theme here, I think the theme is this. It's the government reaching out to Canadians under the age of 45. Those would be your millennial and Gen Z voters. The first 80 pages of Budget 2024 details how the government will spur the construction of nearly 4 million new homes within 7 years.
Mr. Speaker, our work to build more homes faster across our country is quite literally an exercise in nation building, a true Team Canada effort.
There is more than $8 billion worth of housing initiatives in the budget, which the government says is aimed at helping young Canadians achieve the middle-class dream of owning a home.
In terms of an outlay of resources, another something $8 billion approximately in new resources is relatively ambitious in this environment where we're still running with elevated deficits and debt.
But there's a host of other items clearly aimed at younger voters. $500 million, for example, set aside for a youth mental health fund. And Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland repeated the commitment for free birth control pills through the National Pharmacare Plan. And there's some non-monetary items like new rules to control the price of concert tickets by cracking down on fraudulent resellers, or bringing in a new right to disconnect, preventing your boss from texting or emailing you after hours. All the spending initiatives add up to $57 billion over 5 years, a third of which will be offset by an increase in capital gains taxes.
I think the government wanted to do this additional spending, so they looked at probably what would be the least offensive measures that they could implement in terms of economic drawback.
Now, there are going to still be lots of capital gains tax exemptions. You're not going to pay any tax when you sell your principal residence, and a lot of small businesses will have the same capital gains tax rate. But there are a group of Canadians, a small group, the government says about 40,000 very wealthy Canadians, who are going to pay a lot more in capital gains taxes. In fact, the government says that group of 40,000 Canadians is going to collectively contribute an extra $19 billion over the next 5 years. Donna.
Okay, David Aiken in Ottawa, thank you. The latest inflation numbers are also out today. The consumer price index rose 2.9% year over year in March. It's still under 3%, but it does need to come down further if there is likely to be an interest rate cut. With me now is the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland. Let's start with the increase in capital gains tax. I believe you were saying it will affect 0.1% of Canadians, the very wealthy. Can you explain exactly who will pay more, who you're targeting? Is it going to include, for example, someone's elderly aunt who is thinking of selling the family cottage?
Well, let me start with who is excluded, because that is the vast majority of Canadians. More than 99% of Canadians will not pay as individuals a higher rate of capital gains, and I just want to be sure people understand that. So the most important thing, the biggest asset most Canadians own is their home. Our homes are all fully excluded from capital gains taxation. That continues to be the case. The second thing which we are bringing in is a new tier, and this tier means that the first $250,000 of a capital gain in every single year that a Canadian might enjoy is taxed at the current rate of a 50% inclusion. So you actually only pay any tax at all on 50% of it. And it's because of that really narrow focus, which is entirely intentional, that this additional tax is really focused on those at the very top, on people who can afford to pay a little bit more to make the investments that our country really needs, but especially young Canadians really need.
So I'm not exactly clear on who that is then, and you know that the business community is already saying that by doing this, it's sending the wrong message for a country that has a big problem with productivity.
Yeah, I mean, what I think is important for Canadians to know is we are very focused on productivity, on economic growth, and what the Ministry of Finance looks at is the marginal effective tax rate. It has, a really good engine for calculating what that is. That's like the extra tax that you pay for each additional dollar that gets invested in a business in Canada. Today, Canada has, by a long shot, the lowest marginal effective tax rate in the G7, and we have the lowest marginal effective tax rate, lower than the OECD average. With this new capital gains inclusion rate announced today, that doesn't change. So I am really focused on ensuring that Canada remains a really attractive place for people to invest. And one of the things we've done in this budget is make more investments in Canada's economic capacity. I think the investment in AI is particularly important. I think we can all see that AI is the economic engine, the driver of the 21st century economy, in a way that the internet was of the past 50 years. And Canada, we have a real shot here. We are one of the leading countries when it comes to AI researchers, to AI startups. Thanks to the investment that our government is making in this budget, Canada is going to really supercharge our strength in this area that is going to really enhance productivity, create great jobs for today and for the future. And that is on top of investments in affordable housing, investments in housing overall, investments in affordability, and more broadly, really unlocking the promise of Canada for young Canadians.
Okay, we're running out of time. I just wanted to raise one thing with you. Your critics say that the Liberals are good at addition, not so good at subtraction. And that right now the cost of servicing the debt in Canada is $46 billion in 2023-24. That's more than, I think, what is spent on the Canada Health Transfer. Your critics say the spending measures on top of that are reckless. What do you say to them?
Well, I say actually that is economically illiterate and completely ignoring the international comparatives. There are some issues where you can have a partisan discussion and you can have different values. Whether a woman has a right to choose or not, there's a real partisan debate. Whether you believe in gun control, a real partisan debate. But it is just a fact, an economic fact, that Canada today has the most fiscally responsible policy in the entire G7. The lowest debt to GDP ratio, the lowest deficit to GDP ratio, and you don't need to believe me. Talk to the ratings agencies. They have reaffirmed Canada's AAA credit rating. After the fall economic statement, I laid out 3 fiscal guideposts. The ratings agencies said they would be looking at those to see whether Canada was sticking to that path. We have hit every single one of those markers. So the reality is, this is a fiscally responsible budget. That is important to Canadians. It's important to me, and they should know the fact simply is we are charting a responsible course because that's the right thing to do and that's the fair thing to do.
I appreciate your time. We're going to have to leave it there. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, thank you.
Thank you.
How is the opposition reacting? The NDP leader is not happy, saying the Liberals did not go after the rich and says his party is deciding whether to support this budget. The federal Conservative leader did not take questions from reporters after the budget was delivered, but he did have some scathing comments in the House of Commons.
Conservatives will vote against this wasteful inflationary budget that is like a pyromaniac spraying gas on the inflationary fire that he lit. It is getting too hot and too expensive for Canadians, and that's why we need a carbon tax election to replace him with a common sense Conservative government.
We're concerned about the fact that the Liberals ignored the opportunity to take on corporate greed. That's making it harder for people to find a home. That is a major problem that makes life unaffordable. And the Liberals failed to use the opportunity they had to take on corporate greed.
To help interpret the reaction from the opposition, our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stevenson is with me. Mercedes, what do you make of what you just heard? Do you think the NDP would really vote against this budget?
Donna, honestly, I would be very surprised if the NDP were to vote against this budget and bring down the government. They had asked for certain things that the government has come through on, like pharmacare. And while this is not the national pharmacare program that includes a lot of drugs that the NDP had hoped for, we're talking about birth control and diabetes drugs at this point, it is a major plank, and it is a lot of money. The NDP also isn't in a position to necessarily do better if we were to go to an election right now. So while I think Jagmeet Singh is not very happy about what he is seeing in terms of the lack of taxes on corporate windfall profits, I don't see that as being enough for him to actually make the decision to vote against this budget. Of course, the Conservatives will vote against the budget. That is, of course, to be expected. When it comes to those corporate windfall taxes, by the way, an interesting bit of information that I've been hearing, Donna, as we walk around and talk to stakeholders who are on Parliament Hill on Budget Day, apparently there was a big debate about whether or not to include this right up to the 11th hour. There were some inside Cabinet who thought that it was critical to include this tax on corporate windfalls, especially since the government had been making a big deal about going after grocers, sort of these fat cat corporate types as they make them out to be, and really needing to go after their profits. And then they made the decision not to. And that's because the side of Cabinet that was arguing this would actually cause capital flight and would cause corporations to potentially leave Canada won out. And the business community was lobbying very hard on this. The oil and gas business as well was doing so. And it was interesting because when I spoke to the Environment Minister a couple of weeks ago on the West Block, Donna, he indicated that they were concerned that any more taxes on oil and gas could cause those companies to leave for another more competitive market.
Okay, Mercedes Stevenson, thanks for that. Planning retaliation coming up. Israel signals its intention to respond to Iran despite calls to de-escalate.
When I found Hostinger and I found out about the website builder, I was really blown away. It made building a website
This is the Danish capital, Copenhagen. Fire engulfed the city's historic stock exchange building this morning. Bystanders watched as the building's fire collapsed. It was one of Copenhagen's oldest buildings. It dates back to 1625. It had been undergoing renovations. People rushed to the scene to try to save cultural artifacts and artwork from the building. No one was injured, and it's not yet clear how the fire started. Israel has yet to signal how it intends to respond after Iran's unprecedented direct attack over the weekend, but it did target other enemies today in Lebanon. The Israeli army says it killed 3 Hezbollah commanders in 3 separate airstrikes in southern Lebanon, including a man Israel says was a senior official in the military wing of Hezbollah, an Iranian proxy group. Israel's allies are continuing their calls on Israel to de-escalate. The Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has remained quiet about his government's plans, but 2 of his top military officials were talking tough today. Crystal Gamansing reports.
Retrieved from the Dead Sea, Israel says more than 110 of these ballistic missiles were fired by Iran late Saturday.
Those ballistic missiles would hit Israel. It would cause dangerous consequences.
2 of Israel's top military personnel displayed part of one of those missiles for the media, attempting to highlight the threat Israel says Iran poses while justifying potential retaliatory action.
They have encircled Israel in a ring of fire. That's unacceptable. We need to make sure that they can't be successful in their diabolical intentions.
Iran's strike on Israel altered the landscape. Historically, it's Iranian proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthi rebels who engage with Israel.
Various aspects of Israeli security doctrine has been broken. The reputation of Israel at the international level has been challenged.
Israel's military campaign to eliminate Hamas after its deadly October 7th attack has left Gaza in ruins with more than 1 million people facing catastrophic hunger. Many leaders in the region don't want to see hostilities spread.
The humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza is already inflaming the region. We do not need more conflict in our region.
Netanyahu is endangering the lives of both his own civilians and all of the people of the region to extend his political life. Turkey's leader says the strike on the Iranian embassy in Syria on April 1st, said to have been carried out by Israel, was the straw that broke the camel's back. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, London.
Jury duty ahead, assembling the people who will decide Donald Trump's fate at his hush money trial. Lawmakers in the UK have backed a landmark bill to phase out smoking. The legislation cleared its first hurdle in Parliament today, despite some opposition from within Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's own party. If passed, it would be among the toughest anti-smoking measure in the world, making it illegal to sell tobacco products to anyone born after January 1st, 2009. Advocates say they want to create the first smoke-free generation. 7 jurors have now been chosen in the criminal trial of former U.S. President Donald Trump. They include an English teacher, an oncology nurse, and a corporate lawyer. A string of potential jurors were questioned for hours about their political beliefs, media consumption, and their views on Trump. Lawyers have a challenge finding a panel of 12 people who can hear the case impartially. One woman who was dismissed from the jury pool because of work issues later said to reporters she is no fan of Trump.
Everyone was really taking it upon themselves to step in and do their civic duty here, I think, regardless of what people came into it thinking about the defendant.
Trump has pleaded not guilty to 34 felony charges related to hush money payments to adult film star Stormy Daniels made through his former lawyer, Michael Cohen. Jurors in Alberta are now deliberating in the case involving 3 men accused of orchestrating the border shutdown near Coutts in 2022. The men are charged with mischief over $5,000. They pleaded not guilty. It's alleged they spearheaded that protest, which blocked cross-border traffic between Alberta and Montana for 2 weeks. The defense claims protesters had competing interests, and it wasn't clear who was in charge. A disturbing story in Manitoba is developing tonight. 3 high school hockey players, all 17 years old, have been arrested in relation to 2 separate reports of hazing. Melissa Ridgen is in Winnipeg with information on the investigation. Melissa.
Donna, the RCMP say 2 17-year-olds could face charges of sexual assault with a weapon, sexual assault, and forcible confinement. Another 17-year-old could be charged with sexual assault and assault. They say there are 5 alleged victims. The boys were rookies on their high school hockey team. All are 15 or 16 years old.
The Pembina Valley RCMP were made aware of the hazing incident by a high school principal, one of the principals down in that area. She was made aware by the coaching staff. So the coaching staff found out about it, reported it to the principal. The principal then in turn called the RCMP.
Presumably to protect their identities. Police aren't naming the team or the community. We just know that the school is located in rural southern Manitoba. The RCMP alleged the crimes occurred on 2 separate occasions, one last November and another in January. Both of these reportedly at Winnipeg hotels while the team was in the city for tournaments. The Crown is now deciding on which of the charges will be laid. All 3 suspects have been released from custody with a court appearance set for June 10th here in Winnipeg. Donna.
Okay, Melissa Ridgen in Winnipeg, thanks. Uniforms unveiled next. What Team Canada will wear at this summer's Paris Olympics. She is college basketball's all-time leading scorer, and Caitlin Clark is now off to the WNBA, joining the Indiana Fever. She's got a 4-year contract worth $338,000 US. Here's how that compares to what the NBA #1 draft pick got last year. He was signed to a contract worth more than $55 million over 4 years. And Kingston, Ontario's Aaliyah Edwards was chosen 6th overall. She's going to the Washington Mystics, and she'll also be playing for Team Canada at the Paris Olympics in July. The Olympic torch is on its way. It started the run in ancient Olympia this morning and will be carried across Greece for 11 days, then throughout France until the opening ceremony of the Paris Games on July 26th. We now know what Team Canada will be wearing at the Paris Olympics.
He's wearing our cooling base layer, which is new for summer.
Wow, these all-red tracksuits are what Canadian Olympians and Paralympians will be decked out in for the opening ceremony. The details on them meant to celebrate Canada's diversity. They're designed by Vancouver-based Lululemon. They're getting mixed reviews, some praising them for combining function with fashion, others saying the look is a bit subdued compared to previous Olympics. I don't know, you decide. That is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Calgary. People there woke up to this. Hello, snow shovel. Some parts of the city could get up to 15 centimeters through Wednesday, but it is expected to warm up and melt this weekend, so maybe no need for a shovel after all. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Increasing. We cover all subjects. We verify. We commit. On the ground, in all circumstances, to anticipate the future by understanding the present. We are with you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. France 24, an alternative look at the news. Liberté, égalité, actualité.
Israel mauls a response to the barrage of missiles and drones fired by Iran. This while the US and its allies move to slap Tehran with sanctions in the wake of the attack. A step forward in Donald Trump's historic criminal trial in New York as 7 jurors are picked after none were selected on Monday. This over worries about impartiality. The former US president once again bashing the case, calling the judge a, quote, Trump hater. And the countdown is on until the start of the Olympic Games. The Olympic torch is set aflame in the ancient city of Olympia Tuesday, marking 100 days till kickoff. Hello, thanks for joining us here at France 24. The fallout from a barrage of Iranian strikes targeting Israel over the weekend is still being felt. In the wake of the attack, the US says it will slap Iran with sanctions, with the National Security Advisor Jack Sullivan warning that Washington will take action in the coming days. The EU, for its part, is contemplating penalties, while Israel is also doing some deliberating of its own. Its war cabinet met for a 3rd day to mull a response to the weekend attack. With more on what that response could look like, here's France 24's Emerald Maxwell.
These 5 men that make up Israel's war cabinet are deciding how to respond to Iran's attack. On Monday, the chief of staff was determined Israel would do so.
Iran will face the consequences for its actions. We will choose our response accordingly.
Several options are on the table. The most audacious, a direct attack on Iranian soil. The country is 1,500 kilometers away, so within range of Israeli missiles and planes, and Iran's anti-aircraft defenses are weak. Possible targets include military facilities, leaders from the Revolutionary Guards, or Iran's nuclear sites. Israel-linked plots have been targeting its clandestine nuclear program for years.
If Israel strikes the Iran nuclear program, I don't think any other country will enter the war. Iran is developing these nuclear arms in secret, and we know that many countries, including France, are against it doing so. So I think that this is the most likely possible scenario for Israel's response.
Alternatively, Israel could choose to attack Iran's proxies in Yemen, Syria, Iraq, or Lebanon, where Israel is already exchanging almost daily cross-border fire with Hezbollah. Meeting new army recruits on Tuesday, the Israeli Prime Minister said that fighting Hamas was part of a greater campaign.
Iran stands behind Hamas, behind Hezbollah, behind others, but we are determined to win there and defend ourselves in all arenas.
Netanyahu could also heed Joe Biden and other world leaders who are calling for de-escalation in efforts to prevent a wider regional conflict.
Staying in the region, 2 Hezbollah commanders and another operative have been killed after Israeli strikes hit the village of Anbail in southern Lebanon. Israel says one of those commanders was Ismail Baz, who headed the Iranian-backed group's coastal sector. The Israeli army say Baz was involved in planning rocket and anti-tank missile attacks. The two sides have been exchanging near daily cross-border fire since October 7th. Let's move to the war in Ukraine now, because Tuesday marks the inking into law of a controversial new mobilization bill by President Zelensky. The legislation is aimed at boosting the army's ranks, which have been depleted after more than 2 years of war against Russia, with many soldiers dead, wounded, or struggling with fatigue. The new law, though, does not demobilize long-serving soldiers, leaving them effectively in limbo about when they can return home. Charlotte Hughes reports.
It's a move aimed at ramping up Ukraine's troop numbers as Kyiv presses ahead with its grueling counteroffensive against Russia. After receiving the green light from lawmakers last week, a bill overhauling mobilization rules has been signed into law by Volodymyr Zelensky. It hardens punishments for draft dodgers, increases payments to those who volunteer, and requires men to ensure their draft details are up to date with the authorities. Controversially, though, a clause that would have enabled soldiers to leave the military after 3 years of service was excluded. According to lawmakers, demobilization is set to be covered in a separate bill. But for now, long-serving soldiers have no clear timeframe for when they may return home.
People need to know what they're doing. If you were told that you were serving till 2025, you'd know that if you survived, you'd be going home. If people can't make plans, they get depressed and they start making mistakes.
More than 2 years after Russia's invasion, Ukraine is outnumbered and outgunned by Moscow's forces on the ground. Last week, Ukraine's army chief said that the situation on the eastern front had worsened, and that Russian troops aim to take the town of Chasiv Yar in early May. It comes after Russia captured the city of Avdiivka in February, where some residents nearby are still reluctant to leave.
I don't want to leave yet. I want someone to help me get my documents. They're covered in rubble. We don't have money, not a penny. There's no pension, nothing.
As well as grappling with a shortage of manpower, Kyiv is facing delays in much-needed aid from Western allies.
No to the Russian law. That was the chant from thousands who have been protesting outside parliament in the Georgian capital. Demonstrators are demanding that lawmakers abandon plans to introduce into law a bill that would force organizations to register as being agents of foreign influence. Protesters say the draft mirrors a repressive Russian law. Well, Georgian lawmakers agreed to an early draft of the controversial bill on Tuesday, and there's been chaos on the streets and in parliament, as Charlotte Hughes explains.
Tense scenes here in the Georgian capital as police ordered demonstrators outside parliament to leave. Thousands had gathered for a second day, calling for the withdrawal of a bill they say mirrors laws that neighbouring Russia uses to stamp out dissent.
This law brings the discreditation of the Georgian media and Georgian civil society, which are the core instruments of the Georgian democracy. As you see, the majority of the society is against this law. But government doesn't care, and they are acting in the interest of the Russian government.
Proposed by the ruling Georgian Dream Party, the bill would oblige organisations to register as being agents of foreign influence if they receive more than 20% of their funding from abroad. The country's Prime Minister argues the law is needed to ensure the financial transparency of grant receivers. But critics say it would thwart Georgia's bid to join the EU, which has overwhelming support in the country.
I would compare this law to a new Iron Curtain. Some would compare it to a new wall between Georgia and the EU. This law is a way of keeping Georgia in the Russian sphere of influence and away from Europe.
Britain, the US and Germany have urged Georgia not to pass the proposed law, dubbed the Foreign Influence Bill. It has also sparked fierce disagreements in Parliament. On Monday, Georgian Dream's parliamentary leader defended the bill. Not long after, he was punched in the face by an opposition MP. The ruling party reintroduced the bill this month after dropping it last year in the face of protests. It must now pass 3 readings in Parliament before likely undergoing a 4th to overcome a veto by the country's president, a critic of the bill, but whose powers are mainly ceremonial.
Next, US President Joe Biden has been back in his childhood hometown of Scranton Tuesday to kick off 3 days of campaigning in the state of Pennsylvania. There, the incumbents called for higher taxes on the rich and also sought to cast Donald Trump, the presumptive Republican nominee, as an out-of-touch elitist. The former US president spent much of his Tuesday in court for day 2 of an historic trial concerning allegations that he falsified documents to cover up a sex scandal. 7 jurors have so far been seated for the trial after no jurors were selected on Monday. Here's Cami Knight with the very latest.
Donald Trump sits in a Manhattan courtroom while his lawyers continue to question potential jurors. It's a process that's expected to last a week. Those dismissed were able to recount their experience.
It was wild. I really wish that I didn't have such a scheduling thing because history is being made. I said I could be impartial because I think that no matter who someone is in this country, the right to a fair trial is more important to me than my own particular feelings about that person.
The judge had to give the former president a stern warning after he reacted to one of the potential jurors, saying he would not have anyone intimidated in the courtroom. Last year, Trump was charged with 34 felony counts of falsifying business records for his alleged role in a hush money scheme before the 2016 election. And while he was in court, President Joe Biden hit the campaign trail, ammunition for the former president.
I should be right now in Pennsylvania, in Florida, in many other states, North Carolina, Georgia, campaigning. This is all coming from the Biden White House because the guy can't put 2 sentences together. He can't campaign. They're using this in order to try and win an election, and it's not working that way. It's working the opposite way.
For months now, Trump's team has pushed to delay the New York trial as part of a broader strategy to push back all 4 of his trials until after the 2024 election.
Next, we go to Australia, where Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says a French construction worker can stay in the country as long as he likes after he confronted a man who went on a stabbing spree at a Sydney shopping centre. A video of Damien Giraud went viral on social media, and many have called for him to be given citizenship. 6 people were killed and 12 others left injured in the attack at the shopping centre. Jacques Comagel has the story.
These are the two Frenchmen whom the Australian public have hailed as heroes for their actions during Saturday's knife attack in Sydney. When the attacker started stabbing passers-by in a shopping centre, Silas and Damien intervened. Silas grabbed a plastic bollard and passed it to his friend.
I saw the bollard, I was like, well, this is the only thing that is here around, so I just took it.
Using the bollard, Damien managed to hold the attacker back.
Didn't say anything, actually. He was just like very tall, a bit skinny, but the eyes was like empty eyes. He was like, he wasn't there. He wasn't like really there, actually.
After killing 6 people, the assailant ran. Grabbing a chair, Damien chased after him, along with an Australian bystander and a police officer, who eventually caught up with and shot him.
She was actually the hero. She did the job. We just did what we did. It's like but nothing to be really a hero.
The two French nationals live and work in Sydney, but Damien was due to leave in 1 month, with his visa about to expire. After footage of his actions went viral, thousands of grateful Australians signed this petition, demanding the Bollard Man, as they're calling him, be allowed to stay. On Tuesday morning, the Australian Prime Minister responded.
I say this to Damien Guerrero, who is dealing with his visa applications, that you are welcome here, you are welcome to stay for as long as you like. This is someone who we would welcome becoming an Australian citizen, although that would of course be a loss for France.
Back in France, President Emmanuel Macron was also full of praise, saying 2 of our countrymen behaved like real heroes, and that he was very proud.
Let's turn our focus to Nairobi now, because hundreds of doctors and medical students took part in a march Tuesday. The protest was aimed at showing support for an ongoing nationwide medical workers' strike over pay and working conditions. The stoppage has brought many hospitals across the country to a standstill.
I feel that the government doesn't care. The government is celebrating in meetings, in seminars, and in conferences while Kenyans are dying, while doctors and healthcare workers are on the streets.
We feel really bad. We feel very empathetic. We are very sad. But now, what we are fighting for better healthcare. And it is better healthcare even for those patients, for everyone.
Now, it was once a landmark on the Copenhagen skyline, but a fire at the city's old stock exchange Tuesday has forced its iconic spire to collapse. Danish investigators are trying to determine what caused the blaze. Many historic artifacts were damaged or lost in the fire, but there were no reports of injuries. Now, there is officially 100 days to go until the start of the Paris 2024 Olympic Games. The countdown was ushered in by the lighting of the Olympic flame Tuesday at the ancient site of Olympia. The Greek city is where the Games were born nearly 3,000 years ago. The torch is now set to travel more than 4,900 kilometers in a relay to the site of the Games in Paris, which will kick off late July. And here in Paris, the Eiffel Tower's countdown clock has also turned to 100 days. Well, that's it from us. Thanks for your company, and do stay tuned to France 24.
It will reduce our time for making the device significantly, and I think this kind of effort should be further researched upon.
This is Asia Now.
Good afternoon, it's 4 p.m. in Singapore and Hong Kong, 9:30 in New Delhi and 11 o'clock in Jakarta. I'm Ilakia Selfaraji, your headlines this hour. The US and the European Union are writing new sanctions on Iran after its attack on Israel over the weekend. Washington says it expects allies to follow with parallel measures. The Solomon Islands holds a national election that will decide whether the country draws even closer to China. Some of the world's biggest powers are closely watching the outcome for its potential impact on regional security. A far deeper than expected contraction in Singapore's key exports for March, with non-electronics shipments dropping sharply. I'm Elizabeth Neo, coming to you live from Ecosperity Week here in Singapore. Green diplomacy is essential to enabling more ambitious climate targets and accelerating the clean energy transition. I'll tell you about the countries that are playing a key role in Asia. Concern is growing of a further explosion of violence in the Middle East. Israel and Iran exchanging threats in the wake of Tehran's unprecedented attack on Israel. The Israeli foreign minister says he is leading a diplomatic offensive against Iran alongside the nation's military response. He has called for countries to impose fresh sanctions against Iran and declare its Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization. Israel's so-called diplomatic offensive comes as its leaders mull over its response to Iran's attack, and the nation's war cabinet was supposed to convene yesterday to discuss the issue, but the session is now postponed till later today.
הם לא יצליחו לממש משוואה שונה של הרתעה מול מדינת ישראל. מטוסי חיל האוויר פועלים בכל מקום שמי המזרח התיכון פתוחים. כל אויב שילחם נגדנו, אנחנו נדע להכות אותו בכל מקום שהוא.
Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi has vowed a stronger response to Israel if it decides to take action against Tehran's interest. But he has also stressed that Iran is not interested in further escalation of tensions. Russian President Vladimir Putin, a close ally of Iran, has urged for restraint during a phone call with Mr. Raisi. The US, meantime, has confirmed it will soon slap new sanctions on Iran's missile and drone program. The White House says it expects its allies and partners to follow with similar measures. The European Union's foreign policy chief, Joseph Borrell, earlier said the bloc is considering requests from member states to expand sanctions on Iran. And Benji Haya has more on the sanctions and how Israel's allies hope that the economic curbs will prevent a military counteroffensive.
Well, this is all about endorsing a retaliation without escalating the conflict. A way forward to hold Iran to account that the Biden administration hopes the Israeli government will also accept, instead of responding militarily. The president's already making it clear that he wouldn't support an Israeli counter-attack on Iran. He's been calling for restraint. He would, though, support harsh financial measures, willing to hit back economically. And that was hinted at before by Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen earlier on Tuesday at the International Monetary Fund meeting here in Washington, attended by finance ministers around the world, the ideal sphere in which to be discussing sanctions. Her department, the Treasury, said it is working to enlist the assistance of China, G7 countries, other global suppliers to erode Iran's ability to continue to export oil, which is a major source of revenue, or get access to the technology that it needs to make the drones that it used to launch at Israel. This is nothing new. The Treasury's already targeted more than 600 individuals connected to terrorist financing by Iran since the start of this administration.
Well, let's take a look now at existing U.S. sanctions on Iran and other measures Washington might take to rein in the Islamic Republic. Well, the U.S. has banned nearly all trade with Iran. It has also blocked the Iranian government's assets in the U.S. The U.S. foreign assistance and arms sales are also prohibited. But Washington has targeted hundreds of individuals and entities, both foreign and Iranian, under its sanctions program. One of the key questions now is, what more can the U.S. do? Observers say the U.S. already has one of the most extensive and comprehensive set of sanctions on Iran, and there are growing calls for the U.S. to directly target the flow of Iranian oil. And some are calling for Washington to focus on Iran's front companies and financials. Another move could be for the US to persuade the EU and other Western allies to take multilateral action against Tehran. Joe Biden, meantime, is facing pressure on the domestic front. House Republican leaders have accused the president of failing to enforce existing measures against Iran. They are considering a series of bills on Tehran, and these include congressional oversight of sanctions waivers and tightening of restrictions on the export of US goods and technology to Iran. Lawmakers also want to make sure that exemptions of any Iran sanctions on humanitarian grounds do not facilitate acts of terrorism or contribute to its nuclear program. Now we pivot to the east to look at China's relations with Iran and the role it can possibly play in mediating disputes. Here's Julie with more.
It's been 1 year since China brokered a landmark deal re-establishing diplomatic ties between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Amid a flare-up in Middle East tensions, observers are looking at whether China can reprise its role as peacemaker in the region. Some say that rests on its economic influence on the region, and much of Beijing's positive relations with Tehran mainly revolve around economic and energy issues. The official data is scant, but China is currently believed to be Iran's largest oil buyer. Figures from European research firm Kepler show roughly 90% of Iran's crude oil exports last year went to China, giving Tehran a critical lifeline against U.S. sanctions. Beyond oil, China is also consistently Iran's largest trade partner. Outbound shipments amounted to nearly $6 billion in 2022. In February this year, Beijing's import bill from Tehran rose more than 17% on year. China has also pushed to expand the BRICS bloc of top emerging economies to include Iran. It was this outsized role in the Iranian economy that's led Western nations to hope that China could take a prominent seat in peace talks and sway Iran against further attacks. China has so far kept a restrained silence on the matter. Beijing has said it's deeply concerned over Iran's strike on Israel over the weekend, but stopped short of condemning the attack. In a call with his Iranian counterpart, Chinese diplomat Wang Yi said their two nations can work together across a range of areas in the future. He signaled the ties with Tehran remain solid as Beijing seeks to balance its relationships in the Middle East while backing Iran in the conflict with Israel.
We spoke to John Dupsaman, Senior Research Fellow, Middle East Institute at the National University of Singapore, about whether China can play a decisive role in de-escalating tensions in the Middle East.
The emphasis of China's foreign policy towards the Middle East is about business ties. It's about putting the priority on prosperity rather than on security cooperation, which is the core of U.S. policy in the Middle East. So right now, the Chinese policy has been unable to promote that narrative. In addition to that, I think what we saw already in the Red Sea crisis is that China has very limited influence or ability to change what's happening with regards to the Houthi attacks. There were hopes already that China could put some pressure on Iran and indirectly on the Houthis. But overall, I think it's also for us a reflection on the limited influence of great powers in general, because what China experiences is what the US has been experiencing for decades, which is that a lot of the Middle Eastern actors conduct their policies dismissing the influence or the pressures from those powers. We have also to consider that if China wants to promote the idea that it is not going to interfere in local affairs, in local tensions, it wants to distinguish itself from the traditional Western approach towards the Middle East, there is a risk when you start trying to put pressure on actors such as Iran here. So again, I think it's an issue of do you really want to get involved in this type of conflicts, and can you actually deliver if you do start try to interfere in the conflict? So probably I assume that people in Beijing are looking at what Washington is doing, and the assessment is quite cautious that even in the case of the US, which has probably even more leverage, they are not able to influence in one way or another the current conflict.
Well, voting for a general election is into the final hours for a Pacific nation seen as strategic for world powers. The Solomon Islands is tiny, but the polls have put a huge focus on China's influence. 50 parliamentary seats are at stake, plus local assemblies, and whoever wins them could have repercussions for the rest of Asia Pacific. CNA's Julie Yu has more.
Now, it's said to be one of the most logistically challenging ballots. Now, here are the numbers. 420,000 registered voters heading to 1,200 polling stations spread across 900 islands in an area of nearly 29,000 square kilometers. It is expected to take several weeks to collect all the ballots, followed by the elected MPs forming a government to choose the next prime minister. Now, it is the first election since the country cut diplomatic ties with Taiwan and switched support to Beijing. Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare has pledged to further boost ties with China if re-elected. Now, under his leadership, that is, China has pumped millions of dollars of investment into the Solomons. His government caught the U.S. and Australia off guard 2 years ago by signing a secret security pact with Beijing. It sparked fears of permanent Chinese military base in the South Pacific. And last year, another agreement was signed to boost cooperation with China on law enforcement and security matters. But standing in Mr. Sogavare's way are several people hoping to dislodge him. Key among them is Peter Kenaloria Jr., who has vowed to abolish the China Security Pact, that he's a former UN lawyer. And his father, Kenaloria Sr., was the Solomon Islands' first prime minister after independence. Now, the prime minister's embrace of China partly fueled waves of anti-government riots in the country. The violence hit the Chinatown district in the capital, Honiara, in 2019 and 2021, and there are again fears of unrest. A blue fence made of steel has gone up around the Chinese embassy, and local police are also getting help to keep the peace with officers from Australia, New Zealand, and Papua New Guinea joining them on the ground.
Earlier, Julie Yuan spoke to Terence Wood from the AMU Development Policy Centre, and he weighed in on the possibility of Prime Minister Sogavare securing another term.
Of course, it's harder to answer in Solomon Islands than in most places. First, because there is no public opinion polling in Solomon Islands, but second, because the process of picking a Prime Minister in Solomon Islands is a two-stage process. First, because parties are very weak in Solomon Islands, voters vote for individual candidates in their electorates. And then second, those candidates move to Honiara and then engage in very secretive negotiations with respect to who they will support in a vote in Parliament for Prime Minister. And so we can be very confident that Sogavare will be one of the candidates vying to be Prime Minister. He will be re-elected within his electorate. But just how well he'll do in the negotiations is much less clear. I would say he's probably more likely than any of the other candidates to emerge from the current elections as Prime Minister. But I wouldn't make any really confident predictions about that.
Well, the defense chiefs of the US and China held their first substantive talks in more than a year as both sides seek to restore military ties. The Pentagon said US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin underscored the importance of respect for high seas freedom of navigation guaranteed under international law, especially in the South China Sea. The disputed waters have become a potential flashpoint after recent maritime run-ins between China and the Philippines, a US treaty ally. Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jin called for greater trust between both sides. He said Washington should recognize and respect Beijing's rights on the highly strategic South China Sea. He reiterated Beijing's stand on the Taiwan issue, which is the core of China's core interests. Issues like Russia's war in Ukraine, North Korea, and Washington's commitment to the so-called One China policy were also discussed. US military officials have long sought to maintain open lines of communication with their Chinese counterparts to mitigate the risk of potential flare-ups. And your Asia Business Update is coming up next with Olivia Marzuki. Olivia, some news from Singapore's key trade numbers today?
Yes, Ella, non-oil domestic exports surprised on the downside, and it was both electronics and non-electronic shipments declining. Plus, Vietnam reportedly mounting an unprecedented rescue of Saigon Commercial Bank, which was engulfed in the nation's biggest financial fraud case.
Years ago, a pact ended hostilities between the Philippines government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, but peace is fragile.
All hell can break loose because of elections.
Will unmet promises derail the peace process?
Hindi maglabas yung mga promises ng government. Hindi maglabas ng tipunan.
Régie en hommage à Pierre de Coubertin, voici le début du relais de la flamme olympique.
Africa now has its own voice. This is Africa News, the only international news channel made for Africa.
Et nous allons maintenant assister au premier porteur de la torche, Stefanos Douskos, champion olympique d'aviron.
Tinnela! Oh, Kallinike! Tinnela!
Enaxi Olympiakis, Lapadidodromias, σε λίγα δευτερόλεπτα. Et nous allons maintenant assister au départ du premier porteur de la torche vers le monument érigé en hommage à Pierre de Coubertin. Voici le début du relais de la flamme olympique.
Africa now has its own voice. This is Africa News, the only international news channel made for Africa. An independent voice, bringing you unbiased reporting and all the voices shaping the future of the continent. Find out what Africa has to say. Africa News, your voice.
A cargo vessel seized by pirates off the Somali coast has been freed along with its crew after more than a month, the European Union Maritime Security Force said Monday. Operation Atlanta said in a statement that all 23 members of the Bangladesh flat cargo carrier MV Abdullah had been released after 32 days in captivity. It was not immediately clear under what circumstances the ship was released. Operation Atlanta has been shadowing the vessel since shortly after it was seized March 12 in the Indian Ocean, nearly 1,100 kilometers east of the Somalia's coast capital Mogadishu. 20 armed assailants took control of the vessel while it was going from Maputo, the capital of Mozambique, to Hamburgia in the United Arab Emirates, according to Amir, a British maritime security company. Concerns about new attacks have grown in recent months. Kenya Power has announced a 13.7% reduction in electricity costs effective this month, bringing relief to consumers. This reduction is attributed to a stronger Kenyan shilling against the dollar and lower fuel prices. The fuel cost charge and forex adjustment charge, key components of the electricity bill, have decreased by 37.3% between March and April 2024. For instance, the fuel cost charge dropped from 4.24 shilling to 3.26 shilling, and the forex adjustment charge from 3.68 shilling to 1.96 shilling. The managing director of Kenya Power, Joseph Siro, expressed satisfaction with the reduction, highlighting its positive impact on customers. These translate into savings for consumers across different tariff bands, with reductions ranging from 9.7% to 13.7%. World donors pledged more than $2.1 billion in humanitarian aid for Sudan after a year-long war that has pushed its population to the brink of famine, French President Emmanuel Macron said Monday. Macron spoke at the end of an international conference in Paris aimed at drumming up support for Sudan's 51 million people. Our primary commitment is to support the civilian population affected by the conflict. Today, significant resources have been mobilized thanks to you, and in total we can announce that more than 2 billion euros have been pledged in favor of the men and women of Sudan. Before this conference, we had 190 million euros in pledges. Tonight, we're at 2 billion euros for Sudan. The aid will go to food, water, medicines, and other urgent needs, he said, without providing a specific timeline. Today, from the mobilization of our presence, it sends a clear message to the belligerents. We are making a solemn appeal out of respect for international humanitarian rights and for the protection of the civil population. We are exhorting them to install a ceasefire without delay in order to enable humanitarian organizations to reach the entirety of those in Sudan who are in need. We're calling for the reopening of every entry point along the borders to enable the transport and efficient delivery of aid. Members of Sudan civil society took part in the Paris meeting, but neither the Sudanese army nor its rival paramilitary were represented.
Remise de la flamme olympique par la grande maîtresse au premier porteur de la torche, Stefanos Douskos, champion olympique d'aviron.
Tonight, several breaking stories as we come on the air. Multiple reported tornadoes to severe storms across several states at this hour. Tonight, we have also just learned 7 jurors have now been selected in Donald Trump's criminal case. Those 7 jurors now in place for Trump's trial, including a salesman who immigrated from Ireland, a nurse who said she had no idea what she was walking into, a corporate attorney who says he's not very familiar with the allegations. And tonight, the judge in that courtroom admonishing Trump for muttering words at a prospective juror as that juror was being questioned, Eric Katersky, outside the courthouse. At this hour, we are watching that severe storm spread across multiple states. Tornado watches in effect. At least 22 reported tornadoes. The system moving east. Rob Marciano timing it out. Tonight, after Iran's first ever direct assault on Israel, more than 300 missiles and drones, what ABC News has now learned about a potential Israeli response. Matt Gutman on the ground showing us an Iranian missile that's now been recovered.
If it had landed in a building, it would have destroyed it completely, causing dozens of casualties.
Tonight, Israel says they will retaliate. In the U.S., Speaker Mike Johnson preparing to take steps to aid Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan, but risking his own future. A second Republican now coming forward to force him out. It could potentially take just one more. Rachel Scott live on the Hill. The horrific deadly shooting of a 61-year-old Uber driver. Authorities say she had no idea that the homeowner she was doing a pickup for had been called by scammers and was told the Uber driver was in on it all. They say the homeowner then shot and killed the Uber driver. Tonight, the urgent recall from the FDA for 14,000 heart devices following the deaths of 14 patients, what we've learned. Also, the warning tonight about counterfeit Botox across several states. Multiple patients reporting significant issues. The WNBA drafting its newest star, Caitlin Clark, going to Indiana. Ticket sales already on fire. And tonight, what do Bill Withers, ABBA, and Blondie all have in common? The big move. You'll hear it tonight.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with David Muir.
Good evening, and we are just back from Tel Aviv tonight, where the Israeli war cabinet met again this evening, and what ABC News has now learned about a potential Israeli response to the first ever direct attack on Israel by Iran, what we've learned. Also, multiple reported tornadoes across several states. The storm threat right now, 40 million Americans. We'll go live to Rob Marciano. But we do begin tonight with the news just in day 2 of Donald Trump's criminal trial, and now 7 jurors have been seated. Donald Trump watching closely as potential jurors were questioned by lawyers for the prosecution and for the defense. Trump's lawyers probing deep into the prospective jurors' social media posts. The judge agreeing to disqualify one juror who wrote on Facebook in 2017, quote, "Get him out and lock him up." The judge admonished Trump, though, at one point, Trump for muttering words aimed at a prospective juror as that juror was being questioned. When she left the room, the judge scolding Trump, telling his lawyers, "Speak to your client." Tonight, the remarkable scene inside that courtroom today, and what we now know about the 7 jurors already chosen tonight. One of them already tapped to be jury foreperson. Here's our senior investigative correspondent, Eric Katersky, leading us off outside the courthouse again tonight.
Donald Trump arriving today at the Manhattan courthouse, where for more than 6 hours he sat watching his lawyers and prosecutors grill potential jurors who could hold his fate in their hands.
I should be right now in Pennsylvania, in Florida, in many other states, North Carolina, Georgia, campaigning.
At the end of the day, 7 jurors were chosen. 3 women, a teacher, a software employee at Disney, and an oncology nurse who said, I didn't know I was walking into this. And there are 4 men, the foreperson, a man born in Ireland who works in sales, 2 attorneys, and an IT consultant originally from Puerto Rico who called the former president fascinating and mysterious, saying he walks into a room and he sets people off one way or another. Throughout the day, the lawyers questioning the jury pool, looking to root out potential bias. The teacher who was chosen telling the court she's not a political person, but adding, Trump speaks his mind, and I'd rather that than someone who was in office who you don't know what they're thinking. Lawyers also scrutinizing social media accounts. Trump's attorney asking one man about a 2017 Facebook post where he wrote of Trump, get him out and lock him up. Judge Juan Merchan agreed to dismiss him from the case. Trump stayed mostly quiet, but at one point the judge chastised him for audibly muttering as a woman answered questions about what Trump's lawyer described as her extraordinarily hostile Facebook posts. One of those was a video of people dancing the day after the 2020 election, captioned, full-on dance party at 96th Street. Judge Merchan warned Trump's lawyer that Trump was muttering in the direction of the jurors, saying, I will not tolerate that. I will not have any jurors intimidated in this courtroom. Trump is charged with falsifying business records to cover up a $130,000 hush payment to porn star Stormy Daniels to conceal their alleged affair from voters before the 2016 election. That payment was made through Trump's former lawyer and fixer Michael Cohen. Trump denies the affair, and today he insisted all he did was pay Cohen's legal fees.
I was paying a lawyer and marked it down as a legal expense. Some accountant, I didn't know, marked it down as a legal expense. That's exactly what it was. And you've been indicted over that?
But prosecutors say Trump knew exactly what the money was for, to pay off the porn star and fool American voters.
All right, so let's get right back to Aaron Katursky live outside the courthouse again tonight. Aaron, 7 jurors now seated, both sides, of course, agreeing on each of these jurors. They still have to select 5 more jurors for a jury of 12, and then, of course, select 6 alternates as well. And Aaron, lawyers on both sides have a certain number of potential jurors they can reject outright.
They do, David. Each side is allowed to cut 10 people from the jury pool for almost any reason, and today Trump used that power to eliminate 4 potential jurors. The district attorney's office used it to eliminate 5. The jurors who were seated were sworn in, raising their hands and told to report to court as soon as Monday, meaning the judge thinks jury selection could be done by the end of the week, David, and opening statements could begin here Monday morning. David?
Which might be faster than expected. Aaron Katursky leading us off tonight. Aaron, thank you. We turn now to the severe weather threat for 40 million Americans as we're on the air here tonight. Major cities, Kansas City, Chicago, Cleveland, all in the potential bullseye. This whole system moving east. At least 22 tornadoes confirmed already from this system moving into the Ohio Valley tomorrow. Northwest of Omaha, this towering funnel cloud tearing up the ground near Howells, Iowa, the reported tornado. In Smithville, Missouri, look at this. The roof and much of the second floor of this home ripped to shreds by a confirmed tornado. And a dangerous moment on board this American Airlines flight out of Kansas City, an American Eagle flight, a lightning strike forcing it to return to the airport, the crew checking that plane for damage. Let's get right to senior meteorologist Rob Marciano. He's in Smithville, Missouri. This is just north of Kansas City, of course, right in the path of this severe weather. He's tracking it all for us. Hey, Rob.
Hi, David. That's where that Smithville tornado hit. You see the damage behind me. The wide breadth of tornadoes with this system certainly impressive. It's very potent. And a lot of wind coming in behind these tornadoes and very active radar still. We've got tornado warnings lining up along the Mississippi River. Look out, Davenport. That's where the strongest line is. But the rain already reaching the Chicago. The tornado watches are up until at least at 8 o'clock tonight. This will kind of go through in 2 waves. The leading wave goes through Chicago in the next couple of hours, and another one behind that pushing across the lakes, across Michigan, across Ohio into the northeast. And then a second line develops in the afternoon. Detroit to Cleveland could see some tornadoes there. Rain into New York by rush hour tomorrow. David?
Rob Marciano tracking it into the night for us. Rob, thank you. And as I mentioned, we are just back from Tel Aviv tonight and this evening after Iran's first ever direct assault on Israel, more than 300 missiles and drones. What ABC News has now learned about a potential Israeli response. Matt Gutman on the ground in Israel again tonight for us.
Tonight, new images of Iran's first ever direct attack on Israel. Video from a village near Israel's Nevatim air base showing missiles raining down. Israel saying they only caused minor damage and vowing to respond. And tonight, a senior U.S. official telling ABC News that response is expected to be limited, and the Israelis have told the U.S. they will retaliate very carefully. We pressed the Israeli military today.
Is it fair to say that some sort of response is coming?
We will know how to do, and when to do, and what to do.
Israel's war cabinet meeting behind closed doors for a 3rd consecutive day, but no final decision over how and when to retaliate. At a base in southern Israel today, we were shown one of those Iranian missiles recovered from the Dead Sea.
What you're looking at here is the back end of one of those Iranian missiles. Right around here would have been the engine, and this fuselage here is actually the fuel tank. It is over 38 feet long, made out of steel, and right around here would have been the warhead, capable of carrying 800 pounds of high explosives.
Israel saying 99% of the more than 300 drones, missiles, and rockets launched late Saturday were shot out of the sky. But for roughly 15 minutes, Israeli and U.S. officials stunned by the scale of the attack, fearing the U.S.-led coalition and Israel's missile defense systems would not hold. Iran saying that attack was retaliation for the Israeli airstrike in Syria that killed top military commanders, and making it clear it will respond quickly to any further action by Israel.
David, with each passing day, the pressure on Israel to exercise extraordinary care here is increasing both here and abroad. And today, the Israeli military taking us to see that bus-sized ballistic missile, which they say could easily have taken out an apartment building. One reason that officials say that there has to be some sort of response to that unprecedented Iranian attack, and analysts telling us it could be covert, but it's likely to have a light footprint, David.
Extraordinary image you witnessed there today really drives it home. 300 missiles and drones from Iran. Matt, thank you. Meantime, back here in the U.S. tonight on Capitol Hill, now a second Republican moving to try to oust House Speaker Mike Johnson as he prepares to move forward with aid for Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan. ABC's Rachel Scott today asking Speaker Johnson about those threats from inside his own party to either step down or be ousted.
I am not resigning, and it is, in my view, an absurd notion that someone would bring a vacate motion. We are simply here trying to do our jobs.
So, Rachel, this potentially takes just one more Republican, Speaker Johnson remaining defiant as he prepares to push several of these separate foreign aid bills through the House?
That's right, David, and it's a move that could cost Speaker Johnson his job. The Speaker has made it clear he plans to take that $95 billion package that passed the Senate with bipartisan support to provide additional aid to Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan, and divide it into 4 separate measures in the House, but that is now prompting calls for him to be ousted. Congressman Thomas Massey joining Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. Both are fierce critics of providing additional aid to Ukraine. Johnson knows that he's faced with a razor-thin majority, so if just one more Republican joins that effort, he could be ousted as Speaker, plunging the House into chaos without a Speaker yet again, and forcing Johnson to not only turn to Democrats to save his job, but also to push that aid for Israel and Ukraine across the finish line, David.
You'll be tracking this for us, Rachel. Thank you. Next tonight to the horrific, deadly shooting of a 61-year-old Uber driver. Authorities say she had no idea that the homeowner she was doing a pickup for had been called by scammers and was told that the Uber driver was in on it all. They say the homeowner then shot and killed that Uber driver. Here's Alex Perez.
Tonight, Ohio authorities say both people in this video, the man with a gun and the woman, an Uber driver, were consequences. 81-year-old William Brock charged in the murder of 61-year-old Uber driver Lolitha Hall. Authorities say Brock had received calls from scammers telling him a relative had been arrested, demanding $12,000 for bail, telling him a driver would stop by to pick up a package with the money. Authorities believe the same scammers directed that Uber driver to pick up a package at Brock's home without telling her what they had told the homeowner. Hall had no idea what she was walking into when she arrived. Brock then confronting her at gunpoint.
I was threatened that she was going to come and kill me.
Hall frantic. Investigators say Brock took her cell phone, and when she tried to get in her car to get to safety, Brock stopped her from leaving, shooting her 3 times, later calling 911.
Well, I shot her in the leg the first time, and I shot her in the shoulder.
Hall later died. In a statement, Uber saying this is a horrific tragedy and banning the account of the individual who made the request. And David, authorities say they cannot stress enough law enforcement will never solicit cash. That should always be a red flag. David?
Alex Perez, just a horrible story tonight. Alex, thank you. We turn next to the Supreme Court, hearing a case challenging a federal law that prosecutors have been using to charge hundreds of January 6th Capitol rioters, as well as Donald Trump. Now that law is being questioned, how it's being used, and the justices appear to be divided on this. ABC's Devin Dwyer at the Supreme Court tonight.
Tonight, justices at the Supreme Court appear divided over one of the key charges brought against January 6 protesters and against Donald Trump. The question, whether the U.S. government can bring felony obstruction charges in relation to January 6th. The answer could imperil a key part of Special Counsel Jack Smith's election interference case against Trump and upend the prosecution of more than 350 participants in the Capitol attack, possibly leading to reduced sentences in some cases. At issue is whether a law enacted to prevent the destruction of evidence in financial crimes, carrying up to 20 years in prison, can be applied to those who disrupted certification of the 2020 presidential election. Joseph Fisher, a former police officer who breached the Capitol that day, brought the case, his attorney arguing the Justice Department has gone too far.
Attempting to stop a vote count or something like that is a very different act than actually changing a document or altering a document.
The court's conservative majority appeared sympathetic to the police officer's case.
Would a heckler in today's audience qualify, or at the City Union address, would pulling a fire alarm before a vote qualify for 20 years in federal prison?
The court's liberal members focused on the plain text, which makes it a crime to obstruct, influence, or impede any official proceeding.
There are multiple ways, in which the drafters could have made it clear that they intended to also operate only in the sphere of evidence spoliation. But it doesn't do that.
David, 2 of the 4 charges against former President Trump in the election interference case involve this same law. If the justices side with that police officer, Trump's attorneys could move to toss out the obstruction charges. He could still be prosecuted on the other charges, but that, David, will depend on the much bigger question of presidential immunity, which the Supreme Court will take up next week. David?
In the coming days, and you'll be watching that as well for us. Devin Dwyer tonight. Devin, thank you. When we come back here, the warning tonight about counterfeit Botox across several states, multiple patients reporting significant issues, and the urgent recall tonight from the FDA. This is their highest level of concern after 14,000 heart devices following the deaths of 14 patients. We'll have more in a moment here. Fake products were improperly labeled, were given by unlicensed people and not in a health setting. Health officials say FDA-approved Botox is safe. They urge people to use only licensed professionals. Tonight, the FDA issuing what's called a Class 1 recall for heart pumps with a potentially deadly safety risk, the highest level of urgency for the FDA. The warning for about 14,000 Abbott HeartMate 2 and HeartMate 3 devices. There is concern over potential buildup of biological materials in the device, making it more difficult for the heart to pump blood. 14 deaths and nearly 300 injuries linked to the issue. The recall is to correct the problem, not to actually remove the device. When we come back, Caitlin Clark going to Indiana. Ticket sales already tonight. And from Bill Withers to ABBA to Blondie, where their music will now be forever. To be next tonight, the WNBA's newest star, Iowa's Caitlin Clark, going first in the draft. Members of the Indiana Theater right there celebrating their newest teammate with thousands of fans at a watch party. Ticket sales already soaring. Her New Jersey 22 selling out. When we come back here tonight, from Ain't No Sunshine to Dancing Queen to Don't Worry, Be Happy to Heart of Glass, all these songs heading to the same place, and what Debbie Harry is saying about this tonight.
ABC World News Tonight with David Muir, sponsored by Etsy. Gift easy with gift mode. Try it now on Etsy.
Funny tonight here, from ABBA to Bill Withers to Blondie, their songs now heading to a new permanent home.
Ain't no sunshine when she's gone.
Tonight, the new honor, and you know every one of these songs.
Warm when she's away.
The Library of Congress inducting 25 additional recordings, now going into their National Recording Registry. Bill Withers, Ain't No Sunshine.
I know, hey, I ought to leave the young thing alone, but ain't no sunshine when she's gone.
ABBA's Dancing Queen. Blondie's Heart of Glass. Lead singer Debbie Harry and what she told the Library of Congress.
When we had it in this album, the record company didn't like it. They didn't hear any hits. Somehow being a bit of a fringe element we got to do some things that were groundbreaking.
Tonight, the Library of Congress saying the recordings are, quote, audio treasures worthy of preservation of all time, including Bobby McFerrin's Don't Worry, Be Happy.
Don't worry. Be happy. Don't worry. Be happy.
You'll be humming that all night. We love them all. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Thank you for making World News Tonight with David Muir, America's most watched newscast.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.